Say hello to everyone. I'm Wendy Dietzler, Director of Events and Education for Trade Press Media Group. And thank you for being here for today's Supplier Roundtable, Healthcare Facilities, Harnessing the Benefits of Digital Transformation, brought to you by our sponsors, Eptura and Salto Systems. We're really grateful for their support. I'll be your moderator today, and I'll be introducing our panelists shortly. In the meantime, a few reminders as we're getting underway. We do encourage participation in today's discussion via Q&A. You can go down to the bottom of your Zoom platform, just right of center. You'll see that Q&A icon. Go ahead and click to open that window, and feel free to type in your questions at any time. We do have CEUs available for this event. You will receive a link to a brief online assessment in a follow-up email after today's presentation. Successful completion means you get a CEU certificate. Your follow-up email is also going to have presentation materials and a link to today's archive, so keep an eye out for that. So let's talk about today's learning objectives. We're going to explore the transformative software and hardware innovations reshaping healthcare facilities, recognizing the importance of data in driving those security and maintenance solutions to address the evolving threats. We want to assess how forward-thinking strategies and adaptable infrastructures really position healthcare facilities for sustained success in that long term. And finally, we're going to evaluate that pivotal role of a lot of different software solutions within healthcare facilities. They have a real role in improving both performance as well as reducing costs. So I can't do all that alone. In fact, I'm not going to do any of it. I'm going to let our panelists do the heavy lifting. Let's meet them now. So joining me today, we've got Kyle Pfeiffer, Industry Solutions Leader for Healthcare at Salto Systems. As an access control expert and a hands-on problem solver, Kyle is passionate about security and safety at hospitals, MOBs, and medical campuses, as well as senior and assisted living environments. He's on a mission to bring new technology and products to market that help keep patients, staff, visitors, data, and property safe, and enhance our providers' abilities to deliver the highest levels of care and the user experience. We're also joined by Nick Stepanidakis, SVP for Channel and Alliances at Eptura. Nick has more than 20 years of progressive experience in the fields of real estate and facility management, mechanical and application engineering, and enterprise software deployments. In his current role, he leads business process design, technology consulting, and project management for IWMS, BIM, and IoT. So with that, we're going to get the conversation started. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Wendy.
I know I gave a little bit of your, thanks, Nick. I know I gave you guys a bit of an elevator pitch, a little bit of the high-level introduction, but Kyle, why don't you spend a moment getting a little better acquainted with our audience and letting us know what you do and a little bit more about Salto as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Kyle Pfeiffer. I am the healthcare industry lead for Salto Systems. I currently live in southern Utah, but I focus really anything North America. So Canada, America, all the way from Alaska down to Florida and California. And really, my focus is to understand, educate, and help with the healthcare industry vertical. So everything that Salto does, being the leader in global access technology provider, my job is to help with the healthcare side of that, ensuring that we are pioneering still. As you mentioned, very passionate about healthcare, but we're creating new technology, creating better electronic smart locks for the systems, and I'm really understanding the trends that go along with that for the healthcare facilities.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah.
All right, Nick, we're going to turn the microphone over to you. Tell us a little bit more about you and what you're doing there at Eptura.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So Nick Stepanidakis, I manage our strategic alliances and partner relationships. And really that means working with our partners to help deliver our solutions to our customers across the world and across many different industries, including healthcare in particular. I'm based in Boston. A little bit about Eptura. Eptura is a relatively new name in the market, but it's the combination of a lot of really tried and true products that have been in our space for a long time. Names such as Archibus, iOffice, CeraView, Condeco, just to name a few. So we've been in this business for a long time. I personally have been part of the business for 20 years, working with our customers to bring great solutions and solve real world problems, including some of the challenges that hospitals and healthcare systems in general have had to deal with.
Right. Thank you, Nick. And we are going to talk about some of those challenges today for sure. But I think the top line we want to get into right now is a little bit of the technologies. Here I've got two experts in their respective fields on that. And Nick, I'm going to start with you to talk a little bit about automation in healthcare. Sometimes I think we throw those words together. It's kind of a glossed over term, but I know there's more specific information we'd like to get from that. So where is it? Where do you think it's headed as we look to what automation is doing now and what it can do for healthcare going forward?
Sure. It's a great question. And in my role of managing strategic alliances, one of the alliances that I'm super proud to be a part of and have been involved in since the beginning is our relationship with Autodesk. Autodesk is a strategic alliance. They're actually a part owner of the business. They are on a journey around connecting the dots from architecture, engineering, construction into operations and providing more automation in the workflows that continue on from the design and construction process. In addition to that, one of the really exciting things that we're doing together is this idea of digital twins. And I think that that's going to really be an emerging technology and help support automation in all kinds of facilities, but it's in particular really complex facilities like a hospital where there's just so much happening, so many interrelated systems, and to really be able to visualize and understand how the interaction of a air handler or a medical gas line, what its impact is on what's happening in the organization, to be able to visualize, see behind the walls, how those systems are all tied together, and if you have to do some maintenance somewhere, what's the impact of that on the organization, on what's happening inside of, say, a hospital, for example, and so you can time the work that needs to happen, and really just get more and more data. And of course, there's lots happening around connecting digital twins to what we would refer to as streams, whether it's an IoT sensor around occupancy for understanding the flows of people and patients, or if it's more around just understanding how the building itself is functioning, so integrating into the building management system. What is it saying, and can we use that data to help predict and manage assets and maintenance in a more proactive way? Said a lot there, but those are just some top of mind things.
It's a great example. You talked about the unique aspects of healthcare. That's one of those, always on facilities. And so the opportunities there that some of these technologies offer us is truly leveraged especially well in a building that really just can't ever be off. No one walks away and turns off the lights at the end of the night in the hospital or in the medical care facility. So with that in mind, Kyle, what about the access control component of this? That's something that I would imagine is the similar 24/7 imperative. What kind of trends and emerging aspects of that technology are you seeing in healthcare?
Yeah, I'm really excited about the upcoming trends, whether it's in 2024 or beyond that we're seeing, but we're seeing a lot of expansion. We're seeing a lot of evolving technology that's out there. Ultimately, at a very high level granular view, we're seeing centralized ecosystems with extensive integrations so that you have the ability to manage very easily and quickly. But some of the technology that gets me up every day that I'm excited about is like facial recognition for credentials. So eliminating badges, fobs, cards, those sort of things so that they can quickly access a secure location a lot easier. Or digital credentials are also really evolving right now. So Apple wallets, cell phones, smartphones, those sort of things. So again, you're not having to go for a second credential. You're able to use something that like a watch is already on you to gain access to a secure area. Smart lockers are another area that's really playing a big role right now. That's both on the staff side and also on the patient side. So a patient might be getting an x-ray or going in for surgery. They have their valuables on them. They need to secure them in a locker while they're undergoing those areas. Being able to have that on site that isn't some sort of old combination locker is really where we're seeing a lot of growth. And then for nurses or staff, being able to use that same credential to store their stuff in a smart locker, or if it's a nurse medical cart that is mobile, that isn't connected to a network, but again, data is very valuable, so they can use their credential to gain, whether it's tools or equipment or pharmaceuticals out of those nurse carts, and having access control to those are all really big. Also, during COVID, we saw, a lot of contact tracing. So where have people been? And, what have they been in contact, or who have they been in contact with? And so access control played a huge part in that, and still does to this day, as hospitals are, and medical office buildings are really evolving and seeing where people have been, so that if there is an outbreak, they can quickly utilize that. And then lastly, I would say our antimicrobial technology that we're seeing. So this is a biocoat on the hardware itself, so that it's a new layer of protection to minimize the spread of about 99% of microbes. And it prevents having to go and clean a door after every time somebody touches it. And just having that technology on the hardware itself is really huge. And those are some of the trends that we're seeing currently and in the future as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. From Nick and Kyle, you both, I think, offered two phrases popped into my head. One was assurance, and the other was peace of mind. That's really important all the way through the user experience, right? And I'm wondering about, just in terms of how do you, when you're bringing these technologies into a space, how do you help the healthcare facility, so the staff, and maybe a little bit of the end user? I'm not sure what level of stakeholder access or interaction you guys have, but how do you help the facility professionals prepare for these shifts? The benefits are clear, but I would imagine there's still a learning curve. So Kyle, has there been any kind of training or any kind of conversations that you feel have been especially beneficial as people kind of cut up to speed with these technologies?
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly a huge part of my job, is education and awareness. So whether it's going to conferences or having webinars like this, just making people aware of the technology that's out there, but they're also looking for them as well. They're looking to improve their facilities and efficiencies. And so a lot of that is educational conferences, having these type of awareness. I'm going on site as much as I can, so I travel quite a bit. Having those conversations is just huge. So awareness is a big part of that.
And I would imagine, we're talking in generalities right now, but every building has its own kind of, I guess, DNA. So Nick, when you're looking at some of those digital twin kind of conversations, what are some of the questions you're hearing from the facility staff and the facility professionals who are starting to integrate those technologies?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned on the last question, change management is so important. I talked about digital twins, but there's, that's a big jump for a lot of folks. Even just in my own experience working with some hospitals on joint commission inspection rounds, and migrating a hospital system from a paper-based process to leveraging a handheld. Like, that was a big transition, and it took a lot of change management to work through that process. And there's so much that goes into that I think oftentimes the technology gets pushed out, and there's not enough time invested into change management. And I can't really stress enough how important that is in these kinds of transformational projects. It's so important. And as I said, from my own experience, seeing it firsthand. But I think, as I mentioned, digital twins is a big leap, but even just little things like renovations and moving from sort of the traditional ways of managing a facility with either paper-based or Excel-based systems to a system for managing assets as a more automated process. Migrating from that to maybe we're starting to leverage BIM or 3D models. It's not necessarily a digital twin, but it's a technology evolution to help us get more granular data, to understand the facilities at a much deeper level than what we may have had in the past. And I think what we're seeing, I think IFMA had a statistic on it, I don't recall what the number is, but there is a significant portion of the facility management profession that are going to be retiring in the next 4 or 5 years. And so getting that information that right now lives in so many of these people's heads who have all this experience of how the facilities work, how to perform the maintenance, what are the, where do you kick it on the side to get it to back in compliance? But kidding there, but really to understand how to get that data out of their heads and into a system so that the next generation of people that are coming behind can leverage the technology and have access to that information that was, not as accessible in somebody's head prior.
Yeah, so since we've got the captive audience, Nick and Kyle, I'm just going to say if any of you fall into that, hey, I'm thinking about retiring in the audience, start writing stuff down somewhere. Maybe a spreadsheet, maybe a Word doc, whatever works. But that is something we do here across the board and across a lot of industries.
Yeah.
And Kyle, we're going to go back now to the healthcare industry because I think you and I were talking, sent in some information yesterday about there's no hiding from headlines. There have been some recent upticks in some physical attacks in the healthcare space. Security is always paramount, but I do think electronic access control might offer a higher level of solution. And I'm just wondering where that electronic access control is starting to kind of fill those gaps. Any examples or just any feedback you've got on that?
Yeah, definitely. So mitigating risks is obviously huge in access control and what we do. And I always say, and it's an old saying, but you're only as good as the data that you have. So using the data behind the technology really only helps improve operational efficiency so that you can see the flows and patterns and movements that help you identify vulnerable areas and really improve security. So some of the things that we can do is just wellness checks, right? How often are the staff checking in on patients and being able to see that pattern and movement of flow so that you can identify weaknesses in movement and access, but also ensuring patients are safe and being checked upon, but also then our patients leaving their rooms and being able to have the data behind that. Again, all of that is really important to being able to identify vulnerable areas. Having 24/7 security management is another part that's really huge. So, these facilities are open almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you have to manage that type of security and that flow. And so having a solution that can really help you secure areas based upon risk is really, really important. And then also just if something does go wrong, having real-time ability to create lockdowns and ensure safety, or if credentials go away quickly, having the technology to be able to, lock those credentials down so that people can't copy things and duplicate things and gain access if they find a credential or steal a credential or something like that. So being able to have that data really helps mitigate those risks. And if your teams are using them, whether it's a high-level hospital that has security teams or IT teams, or just a medical office building that might not have that infrastructure, but having a solution that's very flexible and able to use user-friendly is a huge part of that. To pull that data, again, is just really important. And so having a system that allows for that, no matter what level your business is at, is really important as well.
It sounds like things can move and happen so quickly in these environments so that access to and ability to act on that data has got to be just paramount. It sounds like that's where the digital and that's where our innovations today are really, really benefiting us.
Yep, that's correct.
So we're talking a little bit about those gaps and some safety, but there's also just in general, making sure our visitors and our staff and people know where they're going in a facility. Nick, let's talk a little bit about wayfinding. Are there optimal practices you found through those technologies to find the best way to deal with those visitors for that security piece, but also just getting them where they need to go?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's fascinating to listen to Kyle and the technology around access control. We have a lot of conversations with our customers around access control and how we integrate with access control systems from a visitor management perspective, but it's more so on the occupier side as opposed to in the hospital. And there's a lot of commonality, I think, that we see between the two different use cases, even down to lockers. When you think about remote workers that come into an office 1 day a week and they want to store their things. So when they come into the office, they've reserved a desk. They also want to have a locker book so they can keep their things because it's not their desk. They don't have an office. Yeah. So there's a lot of commonality, and the because of that, and they might be going to a new office from time to time, or coming into a hospital that they're not familiar with the layout. So having the ability to show on a floor plan in your hand how to get to where you're going within the facility is really, really useful. So if I'm trying to get to that conference room, or I'm trying to go to the lab for my tests, whatever it might be, or I'm a facility person and I have to go and do my rounds or inspections, having the ability to look at floor plans and show the things on a floor plan in the context of the real space in a very consumable format, like in your phone, is extremely valuable for visitors and for employees, frankly. People that are familiar with the space that might not know exactly where everything is across the entire building. So it's super super useful technology.
So we've got a question that came in, and we talked yesterday. We were like, oh, are we going to hold the questions? Or are we going to ask them now? I think this one is a great one to ask now. And Nick, I'm going to send it to you first, but I'd like to hear Kyle's perspective as well. Ron asks if you're seeing different security systems implemented around emergency room areas of the facility versus a patient tower or another space within the facility. Just wondering if you have any observations or any anecdotal feedback on that.
Yeah, probably not as much as Kyle does, but I think, I don't know if they're different systems, but certainly the profiles of those spaces would be different within whatever the system is. Again, we do a lot of integrations with access controls, and people will have certain access within the facilities to protect certain types of space from other spaces differently. But in my experience, it's, there's a system that's managing all of that. So I don't really have enough knowledge to know if that's different systems or not, but I would ask Kyle if you have any.
Yeah, let's hear it, Kyle.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one, Nick. The security system is really going to be just one ecosystem, a single system to manage everything. But when you're talking about different areas of facility, wings, different types of rooms, that sort of thing, that's where security levels will change. And we have different solutions within that ecosystem that will provide different types of security. So it really depends on what your needs are, the type of security that you're looking for, and then that's where we can really support you.
Yeah.
From a data perspective, we see similar use cases around data. And when we talked about wayfinding or the ability to book or look at information, so we do see some commonality there, where certain types of spaces we don't, the organization will want to protect data around that. So like an executive suite or other, research spaces, those kinds of things, where there's, and just from the data perspective as opposed to physical access, but so lots of commonalities around how you segregate spaces and data from different groups, both physically and with the data.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you, Ron, for that question. It brings to mind just these conversations that we're having, kind of customizing these systems for specific applications. Who do we talk to? Who do you talk to? Who should be kind of consulted as some of these systems are starting to be integrated or rolling out? Who are the stakeholders that should be in the room? We talk about facility professionals. Certainly there are other hospital and healthcare facility staffs. Kyle, who do you find you speak to pretty consistently in these places, but also who do you think you should be speaking to and should be consulted?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the first thing that I really try to evaluate is this a new construction? Is this a renovation? Is this an addition? Because that also impacts who I speak to. For example, like if it's brand new construction, a lot of the times it's the architect that I'm speaking to there. It's not the security or operations team. It's the person that's designing this whole system, or the engineer of that as well. So that would be new construction. But if it's usually, a renovation or an expansion project, those types of things, you're talking definitely to the IT team, security team, the operational officers of those facilities. That's where the conversations start, where I'm trying to create that awareness and education of what they're trying to do as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Nick, curious to what your answer would be to that question. Who should be at the table? Who is at the table?
Yeah, and it's changed, I would say, a lot. And, just in general across our business, particularly since COVID, we worked a lot. I said I've been doing this for 20 years. When I first got into this business, most of our interactions were with facility management and maybe the leadership within the facility management function. and it was evolving over time. IT was getting more involved. But since COVID, folks like HR have been much more involved in what we're doing, and the facilities impact on the people and how they interact with the space, and particularly during and post-COVID. IT, I mentioned, HR security, of course, if we're talking about access control, whether it's within a healthcare or it's a corporate space, security is getting much more involved because they want to understand not only how to protect and secure people coming in, but how to notify people in the event that something does happen. So mass communication and those kinds of functions. Watch lists, so integrating into watch lists to know who, Kyle, you mentioned facial recognition. So how does that tie into watch lists? It's changed quite a bit. And in my role and I mentioned digital twins and BIM, more interaction with design and construction. Again, whether it's a new build or it's a renovation, design and construction, engaging with facility stakeholders in the planning process is becoming more and more important, so that at the end of a project, the facilities, the security, the people that need to really take over that space at the end of a project, getting those stakeholders involved early in the process is becoming a lot. We're seeing a lot more of that interaction. Specifically, and I touched upon my experience with healthcare in the past, compliance was always a big stakeholder when we work with healthcare facility departments, is engaging in the compliance for, again, Joint Commission, Medicare, Medicaid reporting, life safety, fire, national fire protection regulations that apply to healthcare organizations. So there's a lot of different stakeholders.
Yeah, it just sounds like we need a big table. That's what we're going to come away with. We need a big table.
On the topic, you may, yeah.
So, certainly reflecting on some of the trends, someday, I don't know when, but someday we're going to have a panel discussion that doesn't have the word COVID in it, but let's keep it in for now. It's certainly created some trends, disrupted some trends, and things like that. One trend that we're seeing, whether or not COVID caused it, I'm not linking those two, Kyle, but certainly a trend moving some of those healthcare services out of a hospital into a dedicated or dispersed medical office building. What kind of modern access control impacts are you seeing on that? And is it making things, are you seeing the benefits of that disbursement happening? I'd be curious where the technology is giving you those answers.
Yeah, so it's definitely a trend that's evolving still, but it's growing very rapidly. I pulled some data from Build Central, which basically tracks all projects, whether they're new renovations or expansion. And right now, there's as many projects in medical office buildings as there are in hospitals. So right now, nationally, there's about 11,000 projects, and there's 4,400 of those in hospitals and 4,400 in medical office buildings. So they're definitely seeing the same amount of construction growth that you are seeing in hospitals. And how access control is really playing into that is that, you need a flexible system that can grow with that demand ultimately at the end of the day, that's keeping up with those trends. And so whether it's monitoring, the who's entering or not from a central location is huge. So whether it's a single network between the medical office building and a hospital, where that bigger, more robust security team and IT team can support them, or it's just a user-friendly software that medical office building can manage themselves, are really helping empowering that trend as they grow very quickly. Also, smart credentials. Managing credentials is a huge time killer on any facility. And so whether you're having to change keys, change locks, update PIN codes, having a digital credential or having a really nice smart credential makes it so much easier and just saves a ton of time. And so that's how we're also allowing this trend to go a lot quicker, as you're not having to need a big security team with a very simplistic access control system. And then finally, I guess, security is always a big issue. So emergency readiness is huge in being able to create real-time local lockdowns and really ensuring the safety of everyone is important, so they can do that on site without having to wait for a facility like an IT team to help support that. They can do it on their own. is really helping as we're seeing this type of growth as well.
Yeah. So Kyle, I'm going to stay with you for a minute because we had a
Yeah.
question that just came in from David.
Yeah.
And it's your response. I don't know if we're going to get a number, but he's asking for upgrades of facilities with legacy security systems and networks. How much effort is required to get healthcare operations to buy into the new solutions? You know, I don't know if we want to go on a scale of 1 to 10 or whatever, but obviously we have to be a little objective here. But let's talk about what that effort looks like and how much time up front should we be thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different factors that really go into that ultimately at the end of the day. So number one is, how old is the system? You know, is it time for an upgrade? I'd say the lifespan of any access control or security system, if it's a good one, is about 15 to 20 years. So again, is it time to just replace everything? Or if it's not that old and you're just looking to update it, you know, a lot of that is very easy just to continually to add on, whether it's the same system or adding different components from other vendors that are onto that system that integrate well with it. That can definitely be a part of that. But you know, there's obviously the bandwidth, right? What are you doing with your system, with your hospital? You know, do you have the capital to go in and add these expenses to it? There's a lot of variables that go into that. So it's really kind of deep diving in with somebody like myself and really kind of going through, you know, what system you're using, what's out there that your needs are for security, what different levels of security do you need, and then just really coming up with a game plan and kind of a roadmap for that solution so that you can determine budget and things like that as well.
Yeah. I think those are all things to be considered. Nick, I know, you know, we're not necessarily talking about security systems specifically here, but just in general, any best practices that you've seen for getting those facility staffs and those other stakeholders kind of up to speed or ready to use the newer technologies? You know, I know training is huge, but what does that look like? You know, where do you think people can really benefit from the onboarding process?
Yeah, as I said before, it's it's really around change management and having a program, a well-defined program for how you roll out the technology. Training is of course really important. When we at the beginning of a project, making sure we have that white glove level of support, and that's the vendor, but also internally is through the champions of the program, that they are providing constant reinforcement, constant training, and that sort of white glove support for people during the transition so that they can react very quickly to challenges, problems, learnings, whatever it might be. So as long as there's a structured program in place, then even if it's people are not used to technology, they're moving from a paper-based process to technology. Keeping it simple as much as possible for people to adopt that technology, I think are some of the key things I would consider.
I think anytime I'm faced with a new technology, and I feel like it's every other day now, the children are always downloading new apps, but I sometimes focusing on the benefit versus the change has really been helpful. We've certainly heard that from some people on our facility side. So those best practices that we're talking about, that training and, like you said, that change management, all those little bits and pieces really make a difference when they're executed in that way that's focused on the beneficial.
When we were talking about the distributed healthcare, right? When you're moving out to regional, local, that's a bit of a change for facilities management as well. It's actually a pretty significant change. When we think about a hospital, it's most likely an owned facility supported by internal staff, and now you start managing facilities and maintenance and operations in a distributed way. Then you have to think about contracts. You have to think about vendors to manage that, because you don't necessarily have the people in the systems to track all of that information in a hybrid, leased and owned portfolio. And there's a lot of, as we've seen in this transition, as you were talking about, a lot of change management around that. And how do we look at that holistically and help these organizations to make that transition from owned, operated facilities to these now regional that might be a distance away from the main locations, and it adds another big layer of complexity.
Well, at least no one's bored. That's good. So I'm just going to mention, we've had some really good questions. The Q&A panel is open. We've got a couple more, I think, topics that we want to touch off on before we open up to more general Q&A. So just a reminder to our audience members, you're doing great. Thank you for engaging this way. We'd love to hear more from you. We're going to talk a little bit about data again. I know that came up early on, but I think we can always circle back to that. At Trade Press Media Group, we manage webcasts and conferences. And I think if we throw the word data into a title for anything, people are coming in because they know the value, but they're not sure how to best extract it. And sometimes it's knowing what data is necessary for those beneficial decisions. Kyle, what types of data do you feel are most critical to those modern access control systems and in healthcare specifically? And then how does that impact or improve security and operational efficiency?
Yeah, that's a great question because, as I mentioned earlier, you're only as good as the data that you have.
Right.
And I think Nick said this, but visitor management is one of those ones. So who's coming, who's going, who's seeing things, and being able to take that data and integrate it, into maybe like a local watch list for suspicious activity or crime, and being able to identify somebody that might not be coming, for services or care. They're actually coming to do harm. Having that type of data just readily available to your teams is a huge part of something that I see as very important to ensure safety in your facility. Also, just the visibility of unauthorized access. Who's trying, whether it's a staff person or a patient that's trying to get into a secure location that shouldn't be there, and being able to have that data so that you can come up with a protective strategy to make sure that you're securing those areas on a consistent basis. Other data that's really important in this one's really relying more on new technologies like AI, but tailgating issues. When somebody follows somebody in that somebody should be there and the person following them should not be there, and having video and access control working together with AI to be able to analyze and detect tailgating so that your teams can, address those issues, and making sure that that type of security issue doesn't happen is really, really important. So those are some of the data. Some of the other data would be, denied access attempts. To really uncover those inside attempts is huge. And just, I think also with, remote working and hybrid work schedules, that's another thing where data can really be valuable, so that it gives you insights into building utilization and occupancy levels, so that you can determine security levels and risks at each of those locations as we go to more of those, staff and patients and everything, where it's a hybrid system and you need to be able to see the flows of that. So that's the type of data in my mind that's really critical and really good to track from an access control standpoint.
Yeah. Nick, I'd like your feedback on this too. Using that data to drive those improvements across overall operations, and maybe even, I'm going to throw the word proactively in there. So in some cases we have to respond to data, but I'm wondering if that's what this is here, if we're really using it to drive improvements, or is it more of a proactive application? I'd just love to hear you riff on that for a little bit.
Sure. I think the thing with data is, we always talk about beginning with the end in mind. Like what data or what problem are you trying to solve? And then back into what data do you need to answer that question? So if I'm going back to compliance and I want to be prepared when the Joint Commission shows up to do an inspection and make sure that we are following the procedures, we're tracking the issues and the findings, and we have the data to support that we've remedied it. If we think backwards from that, about all of the inputs that we need into that system to answer that and pull up the data when we're out with an inspector in the field, like that, I think that's the kind of analysis that is really important. And again, going back to involving stakeholders in the early in the process, so that you can start with the end in mind, think about how we would collect, manage, maintain the data through the normal operations to make that information available to us. And that's fairly tactical, but as you step back from that and you look across findings across an entire hospital organization, what are the typical findings that we are seeing? Is it, we're not maintaining our fire doors properly? We see an excess of fire door issues, so we should, those are complex machines. There's a lot of maintenance that goes into a fire door. So perhaps we have to do better training for the people that are using them and maintaining them, et cetera. I think from other types of data, as Kyle was touching upon, one of the areas that we as an occupancy services provider around technology, a lot of data right now is trying to drive what is the portfolio level decisions that organizations are trying to make, because there's been such a change in the amount and the way people use space. So really understanding, as Kyle was saying, those occupancy trends, how much space, what type of space do we need? Where are people congregating? What are the most productive types of spaces? And where's the information available for us to measure that? We have information from occupancy sensors or from booking information or, access control systems, but taking all that information and trying to roll it up to something logical that you can use to answer key questions around portfolio level decisions is one of the biggest areas that we're seeing our customers ask us about, and how we can help answer those questions.
That sounds like a lot to tackle, and that sounds like where that data can just really, really unlock things a lot more quickly, and hopefully a lot less painfully. I think we're going to move into some general Q&A. Just reminding everybody, the portal is open. We've got a couple minutes. Now, one question came in, and I'm going to, I guess I'm going to throw it to Kyle first. I was going to just throw it up, but it's hard to do that in a virtual space without the two of you right next to me. Somebody's just asking about bots and robotics, technology that could be used to help people find their way or move away from another area of a facility. And Steve's just wondering, do you think there is a time in the near term where facilities are going to start warming up to this concept, bringing them into this space? I'd love to hear you, Kyle, and then Nick, I'd like to hear you weigh in as well.
Yeah, as far as the technology goes, there's definitely a lot out there that could be utilized. And I think Steve had a great question. When will that be utilized?
Right,
and that's a hard one to answer, to be honest with you. I think some of the easier things that we are seeing is, being able to have like a kiosk to check in at. Those are definitely things that are starting to be utilized right now, where they can create a visitor badge very quickly and easily, and you can send out and email QR codes very easily to those visitors, so they can just scan those when they check in from a smartphone device and not have to go to a front desk, where they can easily check in and make sure that they should be there. So that's some of the quick technology that we're seeing. But yeah, there's definitely a lot more that the healthcare industry could be utilizing, but they're just not right now. And a lot of that is they're still really making sure that the security that they know and that they can rely on is being utilized before they change that. And so
Sure.
I don't know when that's going to happen. I think it's a great question, but it definitely is something that we'll probably see in the future. I don't know if it's the near future or the distant future, though.
Nick, what do you think? Near, far? You want to put a line down on a Vegas bet?
I don't know. It's an interesting question, and one I haven't really thought much about. I will say anecdotally, my son is in college, and there are bots running around his college campus delivering food to dorms.
Yep.
So, I mean, when you think about that is a massive logistical challenge in hospitals, is delivering food, and it ties into everything from elevator capacity and distances from kitchens and the location of kitchens.
Yeah.
Been involved in a little projects around some of the logistics around that in the past, but to me that seems like an area where it might be there might be some benefits of moving things throughout a hospital, but I really haven't put a lot of thought into it personally.
Yeah, when that question came up, I thought my daughter's college campus is definitely crisscrossed with all sort. It's the new it's the new DoorDash.
I would say, just to kind of add on that, another thing that came to my mind is also pharmaceuticals. I think that's where there's a lot of openness to that, because they're so well tracked already in hospitals. And if they can use bots to distribute those, that I think is something I'm starting to see a trend, but it's not quite there, but it could be in the more near future.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. So if it starts happening, we'll talk about it. Nick, occupancy sensors, is that something you are seeing in hospital buildings? If so, where are those needs coming from? You know, who's driving that, and where are you seeing them from a use case perspective?
So in healthcare in general, yes, from the occupancy and people location and understanding, utilization of space. I think from hospitals themselves, what we have seen is more around patient flow, waiting rooms, and the amount, trying to get a better sense when we're doing, if a hospital is trying to do a process improvement and try to reduce wait times. I've seen some instances of sensors being used to manage those kinds of spaces, mostly in common areas where there's people moving through the space, to understand wait times and number of people in a location for crowd management, et cetera. But I think that's the majority of what I have personally seen.
Yeah.
It's a
Okay.
great question.
Kyle, we've got a question about what solutions or phased steps would you recommend to clients wanting to digitize and track facility assets and conditions a little bit more accurately, if they aren't ready to necessarily jump into, and Nick, you talked about this, a digital twin, so maybe you can jump into, but Kyle, let's start with you. Let's talk about like that actual role of going through that digitization process.
Yeah, so one is the solution that you're looking for, right? You want to have the proper solution to help you track those different things. So our organization, Salto, for example, we have so many different, over 300 different types of access control solutions. So the question is, what type of, whether it's a cabinet, millwork that needs to be done, is it a door? Is it, a medical nurse cart? Those types of things. So the first question is just identifying what you have and what needs to be secured, and then ultimately giving the correct solution so that you can better track those things. And again, just being able to use that in your existing system is huge, or keeping credentials similar so you don't have to have multiple credentials are always really important. So those are the types of solutions that we help when you're trying to identify those things, so that we can really help you track the assets that you're looking to track and the solution with existing credentials.
Okay. All right. And Nick, anything from you on that piece?
Yeah, it's a pretty relevant topic for us.
Yeah.
We talk about digital twins, but oftentimes BIM and digital twins are tied to new stuff, new construction, new renovations, new buildings, new campuses, et cetera. But the reality is, when one of our customers is deploying our technology to manage their facilities and space and assets, they have a mix. They have, probably something like 90% of the portfolio is existing buildings. So they want to manage that. They have old 2D floor plans, and that's good enough. So I would say, it starts with standards, really understanding what kind of assets you need to track. Again, understanding the outcomes, right? So defining good standards for how you classify assets, building a standard around that. And there's lots of standards available. You can search the internet for different types of standards for classifying equipment. And then if you have the data somewhere, great. If not, then there's always a process of some amount of field collection. A lot of the technology today, ours and others, have field tools, so you can go out and scan, take pictures, record the condition, the age, et cetera, collect all that data. And it takes a bit of time, but it is an iterative process. And I think again, once you start with good standards and pick a site, a building, and get that building online, get the data, and then expand from there, build your workflows around that, build your maintenance program around those assets. And then, like I said, expand from there. And that is why this idea of design and construction into operations is so valuable, because that job crawl of going out and finding the assets in the field can be a really big effort. So the more that we can leverage the data that was designed or built into the project, and just transition it into a CMMS, an asset management system, it just saves a tremendous amount of time.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's almost time for me to let you guys go. I'm not quite done with you yet. I want to first of all thank everybody for those questions. Those are excellent and really, I just generated some great conversation. So thank you. Kyle, I'm going to let you have the last word. Just as people kind of come to the conclusion of this, we've talked about a lot of different things. what would you recommend as people really focus on as a takeaway from today's session and today's discussion?
Yeah, I think just being open to how technologies are reshaping the way that we live, the way that we work, the way that we interact with spaces is huge. And, eliminating maybe outdated or traditional ways of securing buildings because it is evolving so quickly and changing. And so just being open to having those discussions and having the conversation, because there is so much valuable ways of securing things and getting the data that will really make it a cost-effective way to secure areas that might need additional security.
Right. Thank you. All right, Nick, you get the last word on those takeaways for today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we talked a lot about things like change management and beginning with the end in mind. I think staying open to change, open to technology, because it is coming. The way that people work is different than it was not very long ago. A lot of these were trends that were starting, but overnight, these trends became our reality. And there's just technology is not slowing down. AI, machine learning are becoming more and more prevalent every day, and the systems, the software is making recommendations, whether it's for maintenance or where you should sit today or what day you should come into the office. I mean, there's just so much great technology happening today, and just being open to that, to the technology that's coming, and how can we be creative in applying it to our unique challenges.
It's fantastic. It's another way for us to just really focus on the benefits. So that's what we'll do. And I want to thank you both for great information today, great conversation, Kyle and Nick. I want to thank everybody in our virtual audience for attending. We certainly appreciate you being here with us. And also one final thank you to our sponsors, Aptura and Salto, for making this conversation possible and keeping that conversation going. Everybody, please watch your email inbox for the archive, for additional materials, and that link to CEUs. And with that, a final thank you. I'm going to conclude today's event.
Thank you.
Thank you.